Hi, everybody. This is Colin Baring, CEO, with Peter Bibler, our managing director at Baring Co. And today we wanted to get a live streaming session here to cover our office hours event and going directly into the topic of the H-1B issue during all of these tech layoffs and everything that's happening in the market today. Typically, we're focused on immigration and solutions, including EB-5 and the other categories. But the big question has popped up that with the massive amount of layoffs that we're seeing, over 118,000 people have been laid off since the start of 2022. And the big headliners now being Facebook or Meta, 11,000 people announced this week. You have Redfin terminating a chunk of people in the North Bay area, terminating their entire robo buying operation for housing, the housing sector, and fintech, real estate, prop tech. Nobody's untouched here. So we're seeing a lot more companies get more aggressive with letting people go in the tech sector. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's been a big deal. And people are asking us now, what do we do about the H-1B? Because with these layoffs, you might have lost your job, you might have lost your salary. It's unsettling. But with the H-1B workers, you've now lost your ability to stay in the country. And from there, after termination or leaving a job or anything else, that snowball effect starts to go through on H-1B, and it gets really, really stressful. And today we're talking about what that does and where it puts people, but also what those solutions can be for H-1B. And if you've lost your job, if you're laid off, what can you do, and what are some of the solutions to move on from there? So, gonna ask Peter and between everybody to participate. Also going through the H-1B topic. But if you have questions, if there's any comments, please go ahead and use the chat. Throw the likes in there when something useful happens, because we want to spread the good word. But also in the comments, we're going to keep adding material as we put it together, whether it's checklists, to-do lists, as well as other references for the visa solutions that we're going to recommend today. But ultimately, maybe Peter, you could start a little bit where once that H-1B termination takes place, like where does that put you as the H-1B?
Yeah, I mean, with these layoffs, I mean, anyone losing their job, it's devastating and disruptive. But with immigration, it just adds a whole layer of distress and complexity to it. And the fundamental issue to keep in mind is that the clock starts ticking. And since 2017, we have a grace period, a 60-day grace period, in which you're still in status to give you some time to find a place to land. And basically you're having 60 days to find a new employer, and to have that be back in that H-1B status. There are key differences, of course, if you're on H-1B and you don't have a pending 485 adjustment status. If you do, you're in a little bit better position there. But there's still some challenges for long-term solutions, and so we're going to talk about that today. But essentially, you have 60 days, to find a new job, or the expiration of your I-94, whichever is shorter. So it could actually be shorter for some folks. And so you're going to need to find a new solution. Either you're finding a new employer to sponsor you. If your spouse is on H-1B, then you could consider moving to H-4 status as a dependent. Or worst case scenarios, even a B2 visa or other visa to change status and stay in the United States. But if that I-94 expires, you might have to leave the country and then re-enter to get the visa stamp to re-enter.
Yeah. So essentially, when the layoffs first happen, the first initial thought really needs to be, where am I at? And what Peter just went through is, the layoff takes place. The employer is actually obligated to notify USCIS immediately that the position has been terminated. the H-1B has been automatically revoked. So unfortunately, there isn't an ability where your employer can just not tell anybody and just let the H-1B sit for a while. They actually are under an obligation to notify USCIS, and then the revocation of the H-1B employment is automatic. So that 60-day grace period starts. And my understanding is that that 60-day grace period does not mean you're out of status. You're in status this whole time. And this is something new since 2017 that keeps you in status for that 60 days. And then if you do not have an employer at the end of that 60 days, that's when you're out of status. But there's also a difference between being out of status and having unlawful presence. So you have this 6-month period after the 60 days that you are out of status, but you do have that extra grace during that 6 months to find a solution. However, this is when nearly all immigration attorneys and anybody is going to be advising you to get things cleaned up and potentially exit the country during that period, because you do not want to exceed that 6 months, or you could be facing a 3-year ban. And then if you exceed that 6 months beyond that, over the 1 year of unlawful presence, you're talking about potentially a 10-year ban.
Yeah.
So those items, like just wanting to think sequentially, what are the grace periods? What kind of bandwidth do you have? What kind of time do you have to work this out? So within that 60 days, obviously finding another employer would be a solution. You do not need to go through the lottery again. You don't have to go through some of those big risk categories. You can be hired. It could be something that it needs to be something that you're qualified for, something that is one of those specialty occupations and it has the education credentials, but it does not necessarily have to be the same job. It just has to be in the same realm. So that makes it a little bit easier and a lot more flexible. And then, as is the case in a lot of the tech industry, software engineers and technically proficient professions, you do have a bit of overlap on a lot of different industries and different jobs. So that's a little bit more flexible. So it doesn't have to be the identical job, but it does need to fit the realm and the criterion for your H-1B to be approved. However, if you can't find a job, which is as is the case in a fear today, because with all these layoffs, when it rains, it pours. And as Facebook and these guys are initiating layoffs, everybody's, if they're not doing layoffs, they're going into a hiring freeze at least. And then a lot of people in the face of down markets and everything else are really batting down the hatches and are trying to weather the storm. And they are not actually hiring at the midst of all these layoffs anyway. So to find a new job in this environment at what feels like the exact wrong time, that is a difficult task. So today, talking about some of the solutions, if you don't have the ability to jump into a new job in less than 60 days, which is really not a long time anyway, to figure out all this H-1B employment, everything in less than 2 months is asking a lot. But other solutions, and one of the solutions that could be talked about today, in addition to what Peter mentioned, where you can immediately try to switch to B1, B2 visas, it would buy you another 6 months. That business visa would do so. But then, there's some people that would jump into master's degree programs, extended study. Wouldn't allow you to work at the same time, but it would buy you time in the education realm to have that F1 visa to allow that time to get things worked out. And then you could switch and adjust status elsewise after you figured out employment and or a different route, which we'd like to talk about, the EB-5 visa, because EB-5, now with the 2022 Reform and Integrity Act, there's a lot more opportunities where EB-5 could be a permanent solution to getting the green card, whereas H-1B technically never was. And the EB-2 lines and the backlogs for very impacted countries like India, China, and some others, that green card line was very long to begin with and was out of reach already. But EB-5, now with the RIA, allows concurrent filing. It allows you to concurrently file the I-485 and the 526 at the same time. And that would immediately put you in processing for the EAD and the travel permits, which solves your issue of being out of status because of the H-1B layoff. So for EB-5, what are the requirements? The requirements is an $800,000 investment, and that investment needs to create the 10 jobs. The regional center projects really do all the work on the job creation and structuring the investments and doing all that for you. So you're really concentrating on the 800,000 investment. And then a lot of people come to us and say, well, $800,000 is a lot of money. And I don't have 800,000 that's just immediately available at the day that I was laid off. So, is it really 800,000 or can you invest with less? And, Peter, maybe you can explain a little bit about the partial capital contributions and then even the loan capabilities with EB-5.
Sure. So, EB-5 is an investment visa. Under the new law, the RIA, the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act that was passed in March, the investment amount is set at 800,000, but USCIS allows you to file the EB-5 petition, which here is called the I-526E petition, allows you to file the EB-5 petition if you show that you're actively in the process of investing. And this has been crucial language to enable petitioners to get started, get their priority date, get the immigration process started. So now under a concurrent filing option that's now finally available in the EB-5 category, to file your adjustment of status, file the for advanced parole, the travel permit, and your employment authorization. Get all that started really quickly, while just showing that you're actively in the process of investing. So, what does that mean logistically? It means that you make an initial capital contribution, initial investment, initial payment to the project. You file your petition, you file your adjustment of status application, get the EAD and advanced parole forms filed, and then typically anywhere from 3 months to 12 months, depending on each person's case. You would then fund the balance of the investment here as to complete the total $800,000 investment. But in the meantime, you're getting the immigration process started right away. Right now, with our investors, we've seen that their EAD has been approved in about 3 months. It's taken about 3 months on average for the work authorization to come through. The advanced parole is typically taken a little bit longer, typically 6 months on average. So that, and we know for sure that USCIS has said publicly on its Twitter account that it's reviewing the EAD applications first before going to look at the advanced parole. So you just know that that you're waiting until the advanced parole comes through before you can travel if your H-1B is expired. But this partial payment plan gives you this approach to be able to get started right away. Here we're in November. We've had a lot of investors take this option because of tax planning, between splitting their investment between 2022, 2023. Other people do it just because they need that additional time for real estate, selling their house. They don't want to be a distressed seller. They want to get maximum value of their sale of the property. Partial payment plan can do that. And the reason, we can do this, the reason Bearing has pioneered this solution since 2017?
Yeah, at least.
That is that we structure the project in a way that we're not overly relying on that EB-5 capital. Like we're already on, for our project, we're already on the 28th floor out of 39 floors. Construction's well underway. So we can be flexible with people and accommodate those partial plans. Another strategy that is available is financing or getting unsecured loans to finance your EB-5 investment. We have a third-party affiliate that's a licensed lender in California to provide unsecured loans to qualified borrowers. This is not 100% financing. This won't. These aren't loans of 800,000, but they are loans that can bridge the gap for people who are assembling the requisite 800,000 capital for the EB-5 investment. And by combining the partial payment plan with a Unity loan, this could be a powerful strategy for people to get started quickly, so they could actually get the EB-5 process going.
Yeah, so to just kind of give it an illustration and an example that, okay, so you get that email in the morning from your employer that says, "Hi, I'm your employer and you've been laid off. Sorry." The 60-day clock is starting. You then could go look at EB-5 and you have that 60-day window that you're in status. EB-5 is an $800,000 investment. You either have the 800,000 that's available from other sources, and if you don't, you can put anywhere from 200,000 and up as partial. So you start an EB-5 investment with 200,000, then you file the I-526E, you file the I-485 concurrently, you go get the travel permit, you get the EAD, you have solved the immigration issue with a partial capital contribution or an installment, but you solved immigration. Then over the course of the next year, you need to fulfill the rest of the 800,000, and you can do that in a variety of different ways. Whether that is selling assets that you have over time on your own schedule at the best time, whether it's real estate, stocks, or otherwise, even taking gifts from family and other sources. Cash is cash, cash works. So anything it takes to get to the $800,000 number over the course of the year would work. If you don't have access to that 800,000, then you have the ability to take unsecured loans from an EB-5 lender. So this EB-5 is a solution, and it doesn't necessarily have to take the full 800,000 up front. So to permanently solve immigration and to get the green card, to never need H-1B again, and to give you more flexibility going forward, EB-5 kind of kills two birds with one stone. It solves immigration forever and gets you out from under the H-1B layoff and solves a lot of stress that would come with it. So that was kind of the message we wanted to deliver today, because getting these phone calls and talking to a lot of the investors that were contemplating EB-5 and weren't really sure when they wanted to go through with it, just because the $800,000 number. But now, because of the economic climate, we're given a violent shove forward toward decision making. So EB-5 can be a solution. It doesn't cost the full 800,000, and honestly, the 800,000 becomes a lot smaller number when you consider, well, I have 60 days, and if this doesn't work, I need to start selling my house. I need to start packing up my family, leaving schools, get our kids out of the life that they were used to, and completely move back to my home country. That $800,000 number and less, if you're using loans or partial payment plans, that's actually not that much more expensive than the money you might lose in taxes and unforeseen financial circumstances that come out of having a fire sale of all your U.S. assets. So ultimately, there are options to deal with this H-1B layoff territory that seems to be hitting us by the tens of thousands of workers per week now, especially after the major layoffs at Twitter, Facebook, Stripe, and some of these other groups. So if anybody has any questions, be sure to use the chat, throw things in there. We can answer stuff live. Happy to comment and or explain anything. Got one question in here. Thank you, Joshy. We have, if you fail to complete the 800K, call it within either 6 months or the 12 months, there's a couple different options. It's a bit of a moving target. So you signed up, like, let's go back to the example. You have the 800K, laid off on H-1B, decide to go to EB-5, file the partial capital contribution, and you've got 200,000 in there. 600,000 needs to come before the end of the year, and now you've failed to do the 600,000. There's a couple different things that happen. One, you have the investment agreement. So your promise to the investment into the project, what did that tell you? Are there penalties? Is there extra interest that's due? Is there some sort of other consequence because you've contractually failed with the project to fulfill the promise? So the investment side is one. Then the other side is USCIS. USCIS, their deadline to see the absolute full 800,000 contributed into the project is actually just prior to the approval of the I-526E. That in today's world could probably take anywhere from 12 to 18 months from the time of filing. It's a bit of a guessing game and a gamble, but if USCIS picks up the I-526E, they see that you contributed the 200,000, but now they need to see the rest of the 600 to make the 800,000 investment. They're going to ask you, and they're going to send an RFE, a request for evidence. That request for evidence will say, "Hi, thank you, investor. We see the 200. Can you please show us the full 800,000, and we will review and complete the adjudication." That will give you 90 days from the day of that RFE being issued. You have another 90 days to respond. So you respond maybe toward the very end of that 90 days. Then USCIS has their second round review of the information that you sent. And if you did contribute the remaining funds and it had the complete source of funds documents and everything was okay, USCIS would likely respond within the next 90 days that you've been approved. So if you had a year's time or whatever it might have been, and then this RFE process buys you another 90 days, maybe this thing gets stretched out to probably closer to a year and a half of time to stretch into the full 800,000 contribution. Like I said, it's a little bit of a moving target because the times actually depend on USCIS and when they reach out and when they want to see these documents. But if their processing times are really slow and they haven't actually reached your petition and pulled it out and adjudicated it, you're actually not in any sort of default at all with USCIS until they come to you asking for it. So if processing times were 2 years or something, you have that 2 years. If they pick it up magically in 9 months, you're going to have to respond to that RFE at that time. But if in the most desperate of situations, if you were looking for the most amount of time possible, you're likely to see an RFE first, then a notice of intent to deny on the second round that gets you another 90 days. You're looking at probably a year and a half of safe amount of time to garner that 800,000.
But we want to avoid this. So because if you do get an RFE, that slows down your immigration processing.
Right.
So if you do, when we set up a partial payment plan with an EB-5 investor, we want to understand the full picture of where the future sources are coming from, and make sure we establish a payment plan that's feasible, because we want it to be successful. We want you to be successful. If you complete the partial payment plan on time, it doesn't have an impact on your processing of your immigration. But if you get that RFE and you go that process, then that would delay that processing time. So that we want to make sure we have a feasible plan to begin with, and so we'll work with you closely to identify those future sources of funds and create a plan that works. The other consideration, too, practical consideration, is that we want to deploy your funds into the project before the project is completed, and that's for just a very simple case for USCIS to confirm your job credit, the creation of the 10 jobs per investor for each investment. It's simplest and cleanest if we can show very clearly that your funds were deployed into the project before the project's construction was completed. So that's a practical cap on the timing of when your funds need to be in. And our project is already well underway of construction.
Right.
And so we want to be mindful of that as well. So those are just some of the practical considerations, but there is some flexibility, but we do want to, first and foremost, present the best case forward at the beginning.
Yeah, and at the beginning is the most important part, because USCIS also wants to see a full plan of identifying the 800,000 and those future sources ahead of time. So we're not encouraging anybody to go into this thing in EB-5 with only 200,000. They have no clue where the remaining 600 comes from. You do need to have an identity of the source of funds and where it's coming from in a plan. And that can include a third-party loan from a bank or a lender. But the 800,000 and the sources thereof are identified early, and they are just contributed at later times when ready. So it's not a plan that shoves your foot in the door and then try to figure it out later. We don't encourage anybody to go down that road. It's just much too stressful, much too much risk, and not foreseen. So ultimately there's ways to buy time, but ultimately the sources of the funds and a plan needs to be in place from the day we start, and that's for the benefit of everybody. So ultimately that is the explanation of where EB-5 can in fact be a solution for an H-1B layoff or a permanent immigration solution. Very few people have come to us because of an H-1B layoff. A lot of people are coming to look just because H-1B is a temporary work visa, and they would like to have a permanent solution to their immigration and be able to start their own companies, be able to start their own businesses and work for themselves, and have the flexibility of not needing the employer sponsor. The H-1B layoffs and the current events happening today is really just spurring a second conversation on the topic. So
Yeah, and one thing to on this idea of a permanent solution and a faster solution is because many of the folks on H-1B obviously are moving to get a green card through EB-2 or EB-3. And if you look at the visa bulletin for China, for India, there are major backlogs in those categories. And for India, for example, for EB-2 and EB-3, it could be decades. It's absurd. In contrast with EB-5, there are no visa backlogs, even for China and for India, in the reserved visa set aside categories. What I'm referring to here is something that's been created as of this year under the Reform and Integrity Act of March, where new investors who are filing today in $800,000 projects, rural, high unemployment, urban projects, and infrastructure projects, they created new visa set-aside lines that start this year, and there are no visa backlogs for people from India and China who normally have faced backlogs in the past in this category. So that's another reason why people are looking at EB-5 as a faster means to get the green card, because the EB-2, EB-3 backlogs are seem to be endless. They're certainly excruciatingly and painfully long, and legislative reform in these areas have just been thwarted each year to try to improve those backlogs.
Yeah, and the idea of the retrogression, the backlogs, Peter's done a bunch of videos on our UEB5 channel talking about the visa bulletin, how excruciatingly painful it is to watch, where all of a sudden the next month and the next month of waiting all of a sudden results in a 2-year backward movement for the EB2 category, extending the wait to try and get green cards. EB5 today is a solution that has no backlog. And that retrogression being gone, being permanent, and being able to get this done, that also is somewhat of a moving target in the future, because a lot of people are seeing that. A lot of people are seeing that EB-5 is current, and that a lot of people are considering this jump because the almost never-ending line for India and some for China for the EB-2 lines and the employment-based categories, and then the other visa categories that still are temporary, whether it's the E2s and the L1s and everything else. EB-5 today being truly capable at less than $800,000, having good projects out there that with seasoned sponsors and developers and people that know what they're doing, and being a permanent solution right now is kind of that golden period for EB-5 with no retrogression and an ability to execute smoothly. And if that line gets really long, one of the biggest benefits will be gone. But today is the day where, in this world, if you needed a permanent solution through EB-5, it is definitely available. So we just implore everybody to take a strong look, and if it's needed, today is the day to take advantage of it. Is there any other questions from the attendants here on EB-5 or this H-1B period? Is there any questions out there that could be helpful that we'd be able to answer live right here? Because otherwise, I think.
Yeah, otherwise, we encourage you to contact us. We do provide free consultations on EB-5. I think, one of the key things that in any stressful situation in these times is to lawyer up. And, by talking to us, we can put you in touch with experienced immigration attorneys that can help you navigate this stressful period of time and identify the best solution for you and your family. And if that's EB-5, then you'll be in good hands to take that forward. But we would be available, of course, to answer any questions for folks. So we encourage you. We'll put a link in the description to schedule a consultation, and be happy to answer your questions, and then give you referrals to attorneys if you need them.
Yeah, and moral of the story, though, for anything in immigration is the big recommendation is whatever you do, don't wait.
Yeah.
Because with the H-1B and a layoff situation, that 60-day clock is coming. For EB-5 in our situation, retrogression is not here. It's current. It's immediately filing concurrently for 485 and 526Es. Waiting only exposes you to a potential line in the future. So whether it's the H-1B stuff, finding situations to keep in status, to not accrue unlawful presence, and for EB-5 to move into a category that has a permanent solution, no matter what, just don't wait. Go ahead and reach out to find professionals that know what they're doing and can give you good answers, and strategize how to take this immigration stress and solve it permanently. So we at Bear & Co. Are available. And then we also have contacts for various different immigration professionals, whether it has to be attorneys or other consultants in the EB-5 realm and everything else. We're happy to help. Feel free to leave us comments here or to reach out on our website at bearingeb5.com. So if no other questions, we are free to close out, and we'll just see you guys on the next live event.
Okay.
Thank you.